All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I expect we'll have some more people joining as we kick off here. First of all, thank you everyone for joining the call today. We're here to talk about the proposed FY18 budget for NOAA, particularly what's just come out of the House. My name is Emily Woglam. I am the Executive Vice President here at Oceanic Conservancy. The whole point of this webinar and discussion today is to provide a little more context for folks on the federal budget process overall, and in particular for funding for the key ocean agency within the federal government, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This is actually our second call that we've hosted like this. We're planning to continue to host calls like this in the future as the budget process moves forward, and looking for, and we'll talk a little bit at the end of this call about ways to engage and ways to connect with us so that we can make sure that we as a community are having the biggest impact we can on supporting robust funding for ocean priorities. This continues to be an unprecedented year, and we'll get into some of the details in a few minutes about both the numbers that we're seeing as well as the process. And so our goal was, in having these calls, is to provide a little context for folks and opportunities so that people understand what's happening and how to engage and connecting with folks in terms of how to get more involved. So let me just start by talking a little bit about who we are. Those are our pictures up there. First of all, we're going to hear from Addie Hoy, who is our Associate Director for Government Relations here at Oceanic Conservancy. Addie has been working on federal policy and appropriations process here at Oceanic Conservancy for 5 years. And has done a lot of work coordinating the broader ocean community on appropriations. You'll also hear from Katie, who is our Manager of Strategic Initiatives here at Oceanic Conservancy, and she's working with us to spearhead our outreach and information sharing efforts, particularly in response to a lot of the recent uncertainty around federal ocean funding and policy. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm Emily Woglam. I'm the Executive Vice President here at Oceanic Conservancy. My role here is to oversee the intersection of science policy and citizen engagement across a number of Oceanic Conservancy's programs. Before joining Oceanic Conservancy in a sort of former life, I also worked at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, where I was the NOAA budget examiner and oversaw budget and policy issues related to NOAA. Before I hand it over to Addie today, let me just give you a quick overview of what it is we're going to be talking about today. Next slide. So first, we're going to try and cover a lot of information, but first we want to catch everybody up to speed on where we are in the budget process. The budget process has a number of steps. We've gone through a few of those and want to preview what comes next. So first we'll talk about the process overall, then we're going to dive into the House budget proposal itself in terms of what just came out of committee last week. We want to give you guys an overview of the top line budget numbers as well as some of the programs that have been targeted for cuts in terms of what's come out of the administration and then what we've seen the House do in reaction to that. Then we're going to be talking about what comes next. We'll preview the next steps in the budget process, what we're going to be keeping an eye out for and keeping people aware of and informed about. And then start talking a little bit about ways to engage and ways that we can work together to make sure that our priorities are heard and are supported in the final outcome. And after that, we'll open it up for questions and leave some time for discussion. So let's just jump right in. Addie, do you want to?
Sure, thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. This is Addie Hoy. As Emily said, I track and monitor the budget process here at Oceanic Conservancy, and so I'm going to provide an overview of some of the general sort of appropriations processes that we track, and as well as some of the details of the proposals we've seen in the last week. And we are going to open it up for questions a little bit later. These big calls are a little bit unruly, so we thought we'd have a question and answer period at the end, but please hang on to your questions because we'll definitely have time for that. On this slide, you can see the sort of general appropriations process as it usually is supposed to look, with a marker at where we are now, which is just following the House Appropriations Committee markup of the NOAA budget, which happened last week. Usually, the process starts when all members of Congress submit their requests and suggestions for federal funding to the Appropriations Committee. There's also the President releases the administration's budget request and budget proposal, and as that's rolling in, the committees hold hearings to hear from the administration and ask questions about their budget. And with all this information in hand, appropriators in the House and Senate each draft their own set of funding bills, including a proposal for NOAA's budget. Those bills then go through a standard legislative process. They're marked up and can be amended and ultimately are voted on in the House and Senate. Once there's a NOAA budget proposal passed in each the House and the Senate, they then set up a conference to reconcile any differences and come to a final agreement on a budget that can pass Congress and be signed by the President. Of course, that's the process unless it isn't. In recent years, Congress hasn't always followed what we would call regular order, and we've seen continuing resolutions which carry forward current funding to avoid a government shutdown. We've also seen omnibus packages where they sort of make these huge bills that tie all the different federal funding issues together into one massive bill with just one vote. And I suspect we'll see some of these methods used again this year to keep the government open and funded, and we'll keep you informed as those emerge. In May, we hosted a call similar to the call we're having today, and at that time we really reviewed the President's budget, the Trump administration proposal. That was really the sort of the first step in the process, and that budget helped inform the House and the Senate as they started to develop their budgets, but it is simply a request. Congress does not have to agree with the President's proposal. Congress really holds the purse strings here. So bottom line, as we are watching the House release their budget proposals, we really are early on in the process. There's a lot left to do to get to a final budget for NOAA for next year. And this is where constituents like you and me can really have an impact in influencing the process as it moves through Congress. We talked a little bit last time and this time about the budget process, and we'd be happy to continue to share information and resources for folks and also answer questions when we get to the Q&A, just to make sure everybody understands the process. So where are we now? What happened last week? The House Appropriations Committee marked up their funding proposal for NOAA for the upcoming fiscal year. Really important, and I know we've covered this a few times, but just to be really clear, this is still just a proposal. The House and the Senate both need to ultimately come to some sort of agreement, and that means that the House bill is just their proposal in this process. But a few key highlights from this proposal that are really important. It would cut NOAA funding overall by $700 million, which is a pretty shocking amount of money. Some key highlights of where those big cuts would occur under this proposal are a 47% cut to the coastal zone management grants, including the elimination of regional coastal resilience grants, a 19% cut to climate research programs. It's about $30 million of a cut, 12% cut to labs and cooperative institutes, a 50% cut to competitive research at the National Ocean Service, the denial of NOAA's request for a multi-year fleet recapitalization funding, and really, the majority of ocean and fishery programs at NOAA would see some cut, even just a small percent, and almost no programs would see new investments or growth under this proposal. So pretty harsh. There was some good news, or at least some relief in some areas, and really truly that's thanks to efforts of folks like everybody on this phone call who stepped up and were very vocal and clear about their priorities. We saw the President's budget proposal completely eliminate the National Sea Grant Program. However, Congress, the House this week, in response truly to a massive public outcry, have really seen the importance of the Sea Grant Program and proposed funding for the Sea Grant-based program at least, even with current funding levels. Similarly, ocean exploration and research, the House would fund at current levels, and the Marine Mammal Commission, which was proposed for elimination by the Trump administration, the House would see that funded at current levels. So that's what we saw last week. We've really spent some time sort of digesting all of that information, and it's kind of the House's marker out on the negotiating table for where they want to see negotiations start. And that's why it's so important to know what's coming over the next couple of weeks. The appropriations process will continue, and though timing is uncertain, we expect the Senate Appropriations Committee to release and consider amendments to their version of the NOAA budget as early as next week. So this is moving fast and furious at this point. If the last few years are any indicator, the Senate has usually provided stronger funding for NOAA ocean and fisheries programs, and we are hopeful that will be the case again this year. But budgets are tight, and senators have many priorities that they're trying to fund, so outreach to the Senate is especially important right now. We've now seen the House's proposal. We know where those negotiations over a budget are going to start, And we certainly want to see the Senate come in strong with much higher funding levels for many of these NOAA programs. And we'll be talking a little bit more in a few minutes about how to reach out to your senators and what to say when you do that. Once the Senate finalizes their proposal on the NOAA budget in the coming weeks, we'll then truly know what the starting point is for negotiations between the House and Senate to reach a final NOAA budget. Those negotiations will be going on all summer leading up to the start of the new fiscal year, which happens on October 1st each year. And as I said, it'll be really important for the public to weigh in to help shape those negotiations over the next several months. And so I will hand it off to Katie to talk a little bit about how you can engage in that process, and then after we're done with that, we'll take some questions.
Thanks, Addie. As Addie noted earlier, the process has moved over and is focused on the Senate now, and that means one of the most meaningful and impactful ways that you can engage right now is to engage with your senators. We have a short window right now when any senator, whether they sit on the all-powerful Appropriations Committee or not, can weigh in on the NOAA budget. And senators right now are drafting their versions of that. And we can continue to weigh in with them, those senators that are directly involved in the budget process. You can find the information online by Googling the Senate committees, but key members of the Appropriations Committee include Republican Senators Cochran of Mississippi, Shelby of Alabama, Collins of Maine, Murkowski of Alaska, and Graham of South Carolina, and Democratic senators such as Leahy of Vermont, Shaheen of New Hampshire, Merkley of Oregon, Coons of Delaware, Schatz of Hawaii, and Van Hollen of Maryland. And again, you can find all of this information by going to the website that we have on the screen here, or by Googling the Senate committees. If you live or work in any of these states, you have a direct line to these decision makers. And if you're able to reach out to your senators, please do let us know how it goes. If you aren't sure how to reach out to your senators or what to say, we would most certainly be happy to help you. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll have some contact information at the end of this webinar for you. I do want to pause here just for an important caveat, however. Trying to influence the budget is lobbying as defined by the IRS. Because the budget is a piece of legislation. Lobbying is perfectly legal for private citizens. In fact, it's encouraged and is simply a way to make your voice heard in a representative government. However, if you're lobbying in your professional capacity, you should be aware of any limits on reporting requirements that you might have moving forward. Restrictions are often about the type or amount your organization funding that can be spent on lobbying. For example, federal funding and certain foundations don't allow their funding to be spent on lobbying. But otherwise, it's often a matter of tracking and reporting your lobbying activities to make sure that you don't exceed any legal limits. And if you have any questions about lobbying, we may be able to help you, but I would also recommend you Googling a group called Alliance for Justice. They have really fantastic resources to help you figure out those types of things. The other way that you can engage right now, beyond just calling and contacting your senators, is by helping bring the budget to life and demonstrating some real-world value that the budget numbers bring to you, your businesses, and your communities, and that's by sharing your own personal story. Many of us are either directly impacted by or benefit from NOAA funding every day, but sometimes it's really hard to see. One of the best ways to bring the budget to life or to help your elected officials and communities understand it's important is, again, to show how NOAA funding impacts you. Next month, we hope to do another webinar like this that will walk through more ways that you can engage, and that includes through op-eds and letters to the editor. But we wanted to give you a heads up today that during August recess, which Addie was just talking about, when your members of Congress are at home, is one of the most powerful times to write letters to the editor or op-eds for your local newspaper, highlighting NOAA's budget importance to you. On our end, we've also been collecting stories from folks across the country, from people like veterinary pathologists and businessmen, fishermen, and estuarine research reserve staff. And we would love to add more stories to the blog series that we're running called The More You NOAA. So if you do have a story and you want to participate in our blog series, we would also welcome you to share your story with us. And again, we'll have contact information at the end of this webinar. And finally, if you found this information that we've provided you today and through our Q&A session later and think that other groups might benefit from hearing a little bit more about the budget process and how to get involved, let us know, because we'd be happy to provide this information to other groups as well. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions or anything.